Action.
Well, you know, we might end early tonight, so. But hopefully that won't be because you don't interact here. Tonight's our last night. This has been a great class. It's been fun. Better than last year, but don't tell them that. Tonight we're going to finish up with lifetime leadership, which seems fitting, given the fact this is kind of the end of the course. And John Liotti is going to be rolling in here. John's a really interesting guy. He's I've got to know John when he started attending the church, and he's been a leader in East Palo Alto for many years. So when I met John, he was the ministries director for Bayshore Christian Ministries, which is a tutoring ministry in East Palo Alto, you may be familiar with. And he's since left and began a nonprofit called Northern California Urban Development, which included really the first credit union in East Palo Alto. East Palo Alto is a really funny town. I don't know if you guys know much about it. If you're from out of the area, you don't. East Palo Alto is truly that pocket of poverty in the Bay Area. And just, you know, the stats are massive in terms of the amount of, you know, unemployed males between 18 and 34 is like 50 or 60% or something in the community. Graduation rates are awful. And so there's been tons of nonprofits that have gone in there, and I think it really made an impact on the community. Back in 1993, East Palo Alto was the murder capital of the country. Per capita had more murders than any other city. And it's right next to what used to be called Whiskey Gulch. If you know anything of the history of the Bay Area, East Palo Alto and like East Menlo Park is kind of the county line. And so I think that San Mateo County was a dry county and Santa Clara County was a wet county. And so what lined up, or the other way around, I can't remember, but just a huge mass of, you know, institutions that sold alcohol formed right on that border. And that was, you know, that goes back 80 years. And basically what that also just brought in was just massive amounts of riffraff. And it seemed to, in many ways, that sort of defined what happened in East Palo Alto. John's gonna be late. So the community itself is just really strange. I don't know what the demographics, you know, it's largely African American, but also like a huge growing group of Pacific Islanders and Hispanics. And it has been a project in many ways, but even today there's no supermarket in East Palo Alto. 30,000 people live there. There's no supermarket. They finally have a Hispanic market, but you know, companies don't want to go in there because of just the loss of merchandise through theft and so forth. And they didn't have a native credit union, and John helped to establish one of those that helped. It's kind of the situation has morphed into another program where they've been working with a lot of the residents who are in default, in foreclosure, trying to help them hold on their loans. The credit union helped with enterprise loans to help them to establish income for the family. So it's a lot of those kinds of things. And they also now go into a number of high schools, and they have a program called Future Prophets that they printed a manual for that essentially takes urban kids and just teaches them about really just basic stuff about money. Teaches them why it's not a good idea to go to the check cashing places, and you know, how to balance a checkbook. I mean, just some very basic things. It's a very sound program, and it's had a real impact with a lot of the kids there. So that's John. So he's going to get here at some point, and he's going to walk us through a lecture that is based upon the book that you were asked to read for this evening, The Making of a Leader by Bob Clinton. John is one of the leaders in the CCDA, which is, what does that stand for? It's John, do you know who John Perkins is? Have you heard of John Perkins? So John's down in Jackson, Mississippi. CCDA is an organization he formed, and it's a large gathering of, you know, about 3,000 urban workers, Christian urban ministry workers that gather every year. John's on the board. and is one of the key leaders in that movement. And so he has found this to be very, very helpful in working with the young leaders within that movement, for them to understand sort of the scope of ministry. The reason that I've included this book is because we oftentimes don't really appreciate the seasons of ministry. And sometimes it's, we've talked about personalities and so forth in the class. Sometimes it's a function of personality. I know certainly my personality hasn't lent itself to reflection at different junctures, and you get into situations in ministry and you think the world's going to end, or, you think it's always going to be that way, or you're always going to be that way. And the book itself and what John will bring from it, hopefully will help us to see kind of the scope of ministry, understand where you've been, where you are, and then ultimately where you're going. And so I'm trying to appreciate my season in ministry right now, which is a transitional one, I think, from church planning and building a church and ministry to trying to move not out of a leadership role with my church community, but one that actually lets me, maybe this is something that you earn over time, but I'm trying to move more into my strengths and the areas that I think I am most valuable to the organization, rather than just trying to do everything. And so I'm in that process, and part of that is understanding that after being in ministry for 30 years, hopefully I can pass a lot of things along to our staff. But if I'm personally doing too much ministry, counseling, and so forth, then it robs me. So that's a big transition for me, but I'm trying to honor that right now so that I can invest myself in areas that I think will have more long-term impact. When I was 30 years old, that wasn't me. That wasn't what I was geared to do. And so the book, I think, is helpful at placing you somewhere on that continuum and maybe helping you to understand the seasons and the challenges at different stages, and also hopefully to understand yourself and also in developing other leaders that you have responsibilities for. But I'd like to just to begin with, get your impressions of the book. How did you interact with it? What did you find helpful in it? What did you, what did you find not helpful, maybe? But what was kind of your impression of Making of a Leader? Chuck?
It was, to me, it seemed like it was the most technical of the books, which kind of surprised me. I thought Good to Great was going to be kind of a really long, drawn-out book, difficult to read because of a lot of statistics and things. But this book, it didn't have a lot of statistics, but it was like an owner's manual. This is the how-to. And I found it just kind of slogging through the reading, trying to get through it, honestly. And so he did incorporate some stories, but a lot of it was just on the technical and the theoretical and over the lifelong thing. So I did find it a little difficult to always want to open it up and continue on with the reading.
Okay, that's an honest comment.
So that was my impressions, but I mean, as I tried to flesh out in the reflective paper, I thought he had some pretty good points, along the way. Mm-hmm. And so, but just that was my broad impression.
Okay, Sam?
I would say probably the feel that I got from it, I was telling the guys on the way here, the feel that I got from it was like if I sat across from my senior pastor and he was just giving me life wisdom for leadership. And I would be going, yeah. And then walk away, and 10 years down the road, be confronted with an issue that, one of those principles popped up, and I'm like, this is what he meant. Gotcha. You were able to put flesh to it. Felt like it was really, it felt preemptive to me, which is good. Like, I'm going to be able to go into ministry now, and then circumstances are going to pop up, and I'm going to, that's right, he said that. And I appreciated how much,
Right. Well, adults always learn best when they have a need for the information, right? And so we can sit and listen and absorb a lot of things, and honestly, that's why I've tried to share some kind of ancillary tools and things, because it's maybe years down the road that you go, oh yeah, I took that leadership class and they talked about this, and you know, maybe some of that stuff will be helpful. You know, I mean, I know that. I mean, that's how I benefited from seminary.
It really summed up, like I told you guys, the section, I believe there was a chapter that was titled Lifetime Leadership or something like that. And that's what encapsulated it. You know, it's kind of like looking forward, all these things are kind of been pretty immediate, the books that we've been talking about. I've been able to implement a lot of the principles. This book was kind of like a good one I want to keep on the shelf and revisit, you know, later on.
This book is more of a grid.
Yeah.
It's more of a grid, and it has to be like that, because there's stages that are discussed that you're not in, you haven't been through, right? And so the book, you know, you could probably write a book on each of the phases, right? And probably be more illustrative and find it more interesting. Clinton is a theoretician. He taught leadership for years. I don't know what he's doing now, but he taught leadership for years at Fuller Seminary, and was involved in his I didn't take it, I wish I had, but he taught a 2-week leadership course in the context of Fuller's Doctor of Ministry program, which has had a profound effect on a lot of leaders coming out of that. I think that if you are a young leader, Sam, you're exactly right in the way it'll process, you know. But that's kind of seminary, that's the way seminary is. Seminary is gonna expose you to different things. Seminary is not gonna teach you how to be a pastor. Right. And I know we try to equip pastors at Western, and I think Western does a better job of it than other seminaries. Personally, I do. It's the reason that I went to seminary originally. It's the reason I came back to teach. But when it comes right down to it, you have to get out there and sort of, you know, get up to your elbows in it. And then, you know, adults learn best when they have a need for the information. And some of the things that you've seen there, I think it'll click in. It's you know, the same thing. I mean, when I was at Western, my theology professor, who I dearly loved, who was not a personable guy at all. I mean, this guy could have been a mortician, you know, frankly. His name was Robert Cook, and Bob Cook was veteran. He was there for years and years, and I'm not sure if they still. Probably Jeff doesn't use this, but his theology notes have been used by other systematic theologians in the extensions. And I have a copy of them. Someone finally printed these things. I had a notebook, a folder. And you know, I go back to those things all the time. I just go back to them. I'm teaching, if it's something on, you know, the atonement or something, I go back into Cook's notes, and it's like, man, there it is, you know. So much, laid out so much better than what I can find anywhere else. And so a lot of seminary is not necessarily mastering the information, it's knowing where to go for it. Because your responsibilities will change, you know, all those things will change. Seminary is really great to kind of get you to know where to go to find the things that you need. And I think that, and hopefully the notes, you know, any class that you do, there's going to be some things that you find helpful and some things you don't find particularly helpful. And some of you have reflected that in your reaction papers, and that's fine. But hopefully there's enough there that if you're kind of struggling in some organizational things, you'll go back and look at some of the great principles. Because I'll tell you, I still just have never found a book that is more clear in the way that an organization can be shaped, and it also helps you to diagnose when an organization just isn't functioning well. And so that's a thing to go back to. And I mean, ever since Good to Great came out, I've gone back to that book just over and over again. One of the benefits for me is teaching this class is it gets me immersed in it again, and I get to hear my friend Randy Scott go through it. And it just, I mean, I took notes, and I made a bunch of, I went back into my staff meeting the next morning and was talking about a bunch of stuff triggered by, yeah, so I'm kind of in seminary too, I guess. But you know, with the other studies, in terms of just trying to really understand what is leadership, you know, I mean, it's this influence, and where does mission fit into it, and you know, what does it mean to be missional? You know, what is a missional organization? It's a catchword, but hopefully we've been able to unpack it enough to where we understand not only, you know, a mission being some statement or something where we've understood, you know, to use good to great parlance, you know, what we're most passionate about, what we could be the best in the world at, and, you know, and what is going to drive the ministry economically and otherwise. But to actually make that mission alive, you know, to use it in terms of shaping the staff, to use it to evaluate programs, to use it to stay on track in terms of what we're doing. So many church ministries are just so amazingly diffuse in my experience. I spent a few hours with a guy today who is part of a church, really dynamic church that's down in Southern California. And, you know, finally was a site pastor and finally had to leave the church, partly because the founding pastor is a very dynamic guy, very, very personality-driven ministry. You know, it was kind of the flavor of the month. You know, it's like, you know, they would do this thing with small groups, and then it would start working, and then he'd have a different idea, and he'd do something different, and here's what we're doing for leadership training, and here's what we're doing for structure, and pulling pastors off one site, putting them on another one, and so forth. And it just kind of wore him out. And sometimes in churches, we'll just find ourselves churning. And churches can be the most ineffective organizations on planet Earth. I mean, honestly. And so being the idea of having the idea of mission, and also just being, you know, having the focus of a vision that is placed on top of that is really a very important, it's just an important thing, you know. And sometimes you may wonder, well, what is wrong? And hopefully you can be more diagnostic with some of these things, because we've tried to break it down with spiritual leadership undergirding everything, but then what's the missional component, the vision component, the organizational component. And now we come back to the making of a leader to kind of get back to that personal component again. And so we begin with the spiritual and we kind of end with the personal spiritual. Where are we? You know, what is my track? What's the arc for me in ministry? What are the challenges at different points and different ages? And how can I use that? How can that be useful to me so that I function in the right way and I have a meta view into my situation rather than just sort of rattling around in there, maybe sometimes in kind of a frustrated way. So that's kind of, you know, that's essentially the logic that was applied the way we constructed the course. So what are some other responses to Clinton's book? How did the rest of you percolate on it?
You made a comment early in the book about, I'm forming Christ in you. That's what's going to happen over and over in leadership, and the goal of a life in leadership is just that. I am forming Christ in you. He'll teach us one thing, perhaps in 1,000 ways, and that's it. This could have been a book on marriage. I'm forming Christ in you. This could have been a book on parenting, and you know what Sam had said there. A lot of the information is preemptive. I'm not going to know what it's like. I can read as many books as I want about how to be how to parent a kid until that baby comes.
Yeah.
It's all theory.
Yeah, and you know, we can, you know, there's there's a temptation to try and go get, you know, different skill sets, right. And you know, and you're gonna master, you know, this or master that, master marriage, you know, some form of leadership. Yeah. But I think that Clinton's emphasis is, and I would hope this would be something that we'd go away from the class with, is that this all has to come back to Jesus Christ. It has to come back to your relationship with him and how he is being formed in you. And as he is formed in you, what will come out of you are the right things. You can know all this stuff and fail miserably. I mean, you can rat-a-tat-tat all kinds of information. But if Christ is not being formed in you, then his love and you know, and all of this energy and mission is not being poured through your personality. It isn't, and that's what ministry is. It's really the truth that's poured through a personality. And I just had a conversation with one of my staff, and he's moving into a new role, and he's really unsteady. He lacks confidence to do it. And he doesn't feel like he knows enough, and he doesn't feel, and he's comparing himself with the guy that was in the role before, and you know, I'm not him. And I said, you know, we're moving you into this area of ministry because of who you are. And you may not know everything, and you're going to have to learn things. You're going to try things and maybe fail at things. But you have the instincts, you have the character. I mean, Christ is truly formed in this guy. He just lacks confidence, probably from some dad issues. In fact, it is from dad issues. You know, so there's that other component of life and ministry. But it's something that's going to come out of him. It's not about going to more conferences and getting more bags of tricks and bringing them back and, you know, being the smarter, you know, whatever, pussycat or whatever it is. But it's actually, how does this, you know, how does Christ, how is he formed in me? What does this mean in that context? If we're able to do that, we'll really never fail at anything in ministry. But that's also in many ways the hardest thing to do. Bags of tricks and programs and so forth are a lot easier than that process. So it's good. Who else? How would you interact with the book?
I'm just amazed at how someone would take the time to document such, and I think it's his passion and in his character and everything is amazed. Well, at the beginning, the staging, I can understand that, but he goes through and like kind of document every single aspects of like process items.
Yeah.
And it's like, whoa, we're making lists after list after list. So it's
Gives you a little insight into him, actually.
yeah. And he actually did mention there's his testimony about him getting into some personal conflict. I can kind of see why that happened.
Yeah, I agree. I read that story I think is very, very revealing about him.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
that's actually a reflection too, because that particular testimony, I can see myself in there
Right.
as well. That I can see that I'm flexible, creative when I'm in charge.
Right.
But if someone disagrees with my great ideas, like, why? What's wrong? I could be a little bit
Yeah.
also.
Well, didn't he leave a board, or what was the outcome of that?
He had to leave. Yeah.
Yeah.
They basically kicked him out, I guess.
Yeah. Which I think was a very devastating thing for him at that point in his
Yeah,
life.
that's
ministry.
this was the part about isolation. I think he was isolated for a year or something.
Yeah. I mean, at those moments, you really have a choice. Either you're going to benefit from that,
Mm-hmm.
and it's going to help to shape you for the future, or you're just going to think they're all idiots and, you know, they just, you know, burned you and,
Yeah.
you know, and some people carry around scars like that. I think really good leaders have the ability to leverage whatever comes into their life and to kind of understand it. And I think a lot of the book is him actually sort of integrating some of the things that he did learn in that. But those situations are truly really tests of character and in terms of and commitment to leadership. There's got to be a point where, as leaders, if we understand that it's not our church and it's not our ministry, it's the Lord's. That's fundamental, and that's kind of a cliche. But it really doesn't belong to us. It's not ours. And in fact, we don't belong to us. I mean, Jesus said, pick up your cross and follow, and you're going to have to lose your life to get your life, right? Well, I mean, we belong to him. And so when these situations come along, we have to understand that they're not random, you know. But when we bring these things in, do we still have that sense that, okay, because of the mission that I've been called to, and so I'm part of this great commission, and I'm a part of the most significant enterprise on planet Earth, am I willing to actually make the adjustments and grow and submit myself to that in a way that I benefit, and to try to be the best version of myself? That's what Christ is doing. That's what he's trying to accomplish in me. But we have to be kind of lifted out of our pity and our pain and our, you know, this is another reason why it's just very important to have the right people around you. You need to have people around that are willing to even, not just to be sycophants and just tell you what you want to hear, but just to be able to say, you know what, hey, you know, here's something else that you should think about, and, you know, what's really important here. But, you know, I mean, when you look at the New Testament, there's some things said about leaders that make it, you know, very challenging. Teachers are going to have a stricter judgment. We see that in the New Testament. We also see, you know, but don't take an accusation against an elder lightly. And the idea is like, listen, this is a really difficult task that people are doing, and they can't be pinged and nipped and everything else constantly. And so you have to respect that thing. And so I think that that gives a little bit of the, it helps, I mean, it kind of gives us a little bit of God's perspective on the challenge of leadership and how leaders should be taken care of. Because it's tough enough, and it's hard. I mean, you gotta have, you know, skin like a rhino and a heart like a lamb, you know, someone said. But you have to, you can't just be defeated by something, but you need to be accessible, and things need to touch you, and you need to be shaped and grow. And you just like, if it's for the Lord Jesus, then I'll do it. I think is the right attitude for us. Who else had a reaction to Clinton? Bobby Clinton, in this case. What else did you find helpful in the book?
Well, his comment, you know, who we are in conflict is more important than what we do in conflict situations.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it kind of maybe goes back to Pierre, you know, a comment about, you know, always being in Christ, right? And so I know he was flushing that aspect of, you know, leader conflict out, like you were kind of just saying as well. You know, I think as leaders, you're always going to have people nitpicking at you and confronting you, and there's going to be conflicts in probably every aspect of your leadership job. And who we are during that conflict period, I think, says a lot more about us than you know, the steps we actually do in that conflict situation. So
right.
That was one of the cool things I thought that he had fleshed out pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, as we are kind of moving toward Easter, and we rehearse the story of the Son of God who absorbed all these things, right? So I've been teaching through the stations, and went through the walk from the Praetorium to the cross yesterday, and I mean, it's just amazing what the Lord absorbed, right? I mean, you know, the mockery, the abuse, the physical pain. I mean, when you really get back into those things, it's stunning to see what he absorbed, and then finally offers himself and absorbs, you know, our sin. And I think that there's an image there that's important for leaders to understand as well, and it's this. And I think it gets to your point, at least the way that I'm interacting with your point, Chuck, is that sometimes there are things that we absorb. When we defend ourselves and seek to justify ourselves, we'll tend to make a bad situation worse. Is usually the way it goes. It's not unlike marital communication. You know, if somebody's having a bad moment and lashes out, and the other person says, all right, you lashed out, I'm lashing out, what happens in the communication? Right? And so if one person is able to absorb that and return a blessing for a curse, you know, as it were, then it essentially, yeah, I mean, it essentially, it takes it all down a notch, and it allows the other person room to come back around and to respond in a more appropriate way. I had a situation, this is a number of years ago now, it's 6 or 7 years ago, where we were in a leadership process and to hire another pastor. And the person that we were interviewing was a close friend of a board member's wife. And you know, we were pretty serious about the process. I mean, I was spending time with them, developing them, but in the midst of it, I just became, I didn't handle this right. Okay, so I'm not going to justify some of what I did, but the family was just such a mess. The marriage was a mess. It was just, you know, there was just so many unresolved things within this family to bring them in. And they weren't, you know, it was just obvious they weren't a good fit to the ministry, they weren't a good fit to the staff. There was just so many ways that it would have kind of poisoned the well of the highway community. And we weren't very far into it then. It was about 2004 or something. And so I was really, really troubled by this. And I was talking to John, my associate, but I didn't really feel free to process it with the board because of everything that was said on the board meeting went straight from this elder to his wife, and I knew that it was just a bad situation. We had a person on board who I think is a wonderful guy and is a dear friend, but it created a kind of an unmanageable situation in terms of dealing with this the right way. I mean, I should have done it differently, but I didn't. I was up in the mountains. I drove up all the way up to Pinecrest, and I was literally got up there, did not sleep all night. Was going to spend 2 or 3 days, just got in the car and drove back. And I drove directly to this person's house. And I told the person that we're not going to proceed with this. It's over. We're not going to continue with this process, and that's it. Well, I went from there over to this other couple's house, and I gave them the news first. I mean, they were so, I don't know if I've ever had anybody that angry at me. I mean, really angry. Hi, John. And so, I just basically laid it out and took a certain amount of abuse in that process. And she demanded an audience with the board. And so she came into a board meeting, and I mean, to say that attacked me is not. I mean, I was just getting hatchets just in my head. And I don't know where it came from, but I just absorbed it. I mean, I just took it, right? I explained the situation and why the decision was made, but I didn't react to that reaction. And if I had, I know they couldn't have remained in the church, or I couldn't have remained in the church. It would have been one of those kinds of situations. And so I did, and she was, every time I thought she wanted to kill me. I think she did want to kill me. She could have done it, without anybody knowing. She probably would have. And it was just always uncomfortable, but I made every effort. I really did. I'm not saying that I'm without blame in this, because I don't think I handled the leadership decision properly. I made the right decision in the wrong way, frankly. But I didn't avoid her. I greeted her. I continued with something of a relationship. It was very uncomfortable. It was very tense, very tight. And it literally took a couple of years. And then she went on a retreat, like a prayer retreat, and just somehow that she dealt with that whole situation. And so by not reacting to her and absorbing it, it gave her room to do that, time to do it. They're still a part of our church community, a very active part. Our relationship is better than it was before. It's amazing to me. But I think that principle of, the things that were said about me were not true. I mean, my character was indicted. I mean, it was like really bad. But at the same time, just being able to absorb that, it allows God to work in the lives of other people, good people. And it's a part of the burden of leadership. It is, and that's one of the reasons leadership is really tough. So I think that's a great principle. I'm glad you brought that up. All right, here he is, the man of the hour, John Liotti. Big John. John and his wife Melissa, I already kind of went through the
Teach the whole classroom.
East Palo Alto thing.